The crackle of the stun gun broke the morning silence, slicing through the tranquil suburban air like a razor. Meredith Evans, the paramedic who had raced past the immaculate lawns and well-ordered flowerbeds, felt an electric jolt rip through her body. In her years of service she had treated bullet wounds, heart attacks, strokes. She had even been in an ambulance crash once, but never had she imagined she would be tossed by a homeowners association security guard while trying to save a life. Yet here she was, collapsing onto the manicured grass of Orchard Pine Estates, helpless and in agony. The patient's house, Unit 117 to be precise, was just a few yards away. Meredith had come in response to a frantic 911 call about a heart attack. Every second counted. Every step was crucial. And yet an overzealous guard named Brad Morton blocked her path, brandishing the taser as though she was some trespassing threat. Meredith had not understood what was happening at first. She had flashed her EMS badge and pointed to the ambulance parked out front. She gestured to the bright red paramedic patch on her sleeve, but Brad's face remained stony, as though his script for dealing with uninvited persons had no exceptions. Even for emergency medical personnel, it was a savage twist of fate to see Orchard Pine Estates turn from a picture-perfect community, a place where retirees strolled small dogs, where neighbors competed amiably with holiday light displays, into the site of a horrifying standoff. The call came from Jeanette Williams, a 76-year-old with a history of cardiac issues. Her husband Gary had pleaded with dispatchers, his voice shaking. "She is turning blue. Hurry." By the time Meredith and her partner Kyle arrived, every second was life or death. They jumped out of the ambulance carrying their gear, but before they could so much as knock on the Williams' front door, they found themselves confronted by Brad Morton. He said, "We needed clearance." Meredith would later recall her voice in her sworn statement, "And I told him there was not time for that. We had an active cardiac arrest." But he just kept shouting about homeowners association rules, about not having a gate code or an entry pass. Kyle, the driver, was inside the ambulance calling the on-duty watch commander for immediate community access. Meanwhile, Meredith tried to reason with Brad. Time felt thick, like wading through molasses. She could practically hear Jeanette's life draining away in the seconds ticking by. "Call your supervisor, Brad," barked spittle forming in the corners of his mouth. "No one enters without my say-so." "I am a supervisor," Meredith snapped, pointing to her it again. "Move." Before she could take another step, he aimed the taser at her torso and pulled the trigger. The voltage tore through her, dropping her to the ground. Her eyes welled with involuntary tears, and her lungs gasped for air. As for Jeanette Williams, help never arrived in time. Within minutes, her heart gave out. She was pronounced dead at the scene by the county's medical examiner, who arrived too late to do more than zip her into a black bag. The news spread through Orchard Pine Estates like wildfire. This was a neighborhood used to disputes over mailbox colors and holiday decorations, not the death of an elderly resident because a paramedic was forcibly prevented from providing care. The guard claimed he had done what was necessary to maintain strict protocol, telling investigators, "We have had break-ins before. I was just protecting the homeowner's safety." But the rest of the community erupted with disbelief and outrage. What had possessed Brad Morton to taser an obvious first responder? Within days, the shocking details made it onto local news stations. The grainy cell phone video from a shocked neighbor's porch camera showed the confrontation a few seconds later. That dreadful crackle of electricity. Orchard Pine's distinguished board of directors found themselves under a relentless spotlight. They were the ones who hired the security force and established the strict guidelines. They were the ones who insisted that no one, no matter how urgent, entered the community without passing a checkpoint or scanning a code. To many residents, it was an unacceptable policy that had now turned lethal. The outrage built and built, culminating in a single phrase that overshadowed every local headline: wrongful death. Because the decision to obstruct a first responder was not just a tragedy, it was potentially a crime. Local attorneys began lining up outside the Williams family's doorstep offering legal representation, and after a few days of mourning, Gary Williams, seething with heartbreak, announced that the entire Orchard Pine Estates Homeowners Association board would be sued. On the night of Jeanette's funeral, while storm clouds brewed in the sky, the board members gathered in their opulent clubhouse, ringed by tall windows that overlooked pristine tennis courts. They tried to present a calm, unified front. Still, behind closed doors, fear spread among them like a fast-moving infection. Some worried about personal liability, about losing their savings or property if the lawsuit succeeded. Others grumbled that if Brad Morton had just used common sense, they would not be facing this crisis. Tension, guilt, and simmering anger hung thick in the room. Meanwhile, in the ambulance bay at County General, Meredith Evans was fitted with a sling for her injured shoulder, quietly filling out forms to press criminal charges and preparing for a battle of her own. Life in Orchard Pine Estates was never going to be the same a week after Jeanette Williams' death. Lawn care trucks still rumbled past the regal stone gate of Orchard Pine Estates, and the sun still shone on the silver-haired couples wandering its neatly trimmed paths. But the veneer of calm felt forced. Tension seeped into the smallest conversations. Neighbors pausing at mailboxes, exchanging worried glances. The hush carried a collective question: could this tragedy have been prevented? Brad Morton had been placed on administrative suspension, confined to his single-story condo in the back section of the neighborhood. He remained under the watchful eye of local police, who were deciding whether or not to file criminal charges. A throng of reporters staked out near the clubhouse, forming a daily gauntlet that any homeowner had to pass through, microphones thrust in their faces, camera lenses capturing every unguarded expression. No comment was the new mantra for a community once proud of its meticulously curated public image. In the wake of the Taser incident, the board of directors sputtered into defensive damage control. They convened emergency meetings, plastering official statements on the neighborhood's online portal. At first, they tried to distance themselves from Brad's behavior, calling it an unfortunate, isolated action by an individual officer who grossly misinterpreted our security procedures. But Gary Williams' lawsuit named each and every board member in stark, bold letters, accusing them of fostering an environment that prioritizes rules over lives. The lawsuit argued that had the board not approved an increasingly militant set of access restrictions, Jeanette might have lived. Few people knew the bitter origins of these draconian measures. Orchard Pine Estates was once a peaceful, well-run community. Its volunteer security staff was replaced by private contractors after a spate of petty thefts. A couple of teen vandals had spray-painted a brand-new tennis court, and a brazen burglar broke into a model home. Spooked, the board funneled money from the Homeowners Association fees into ramping up protection. They installed gates with scanning chips, cameras on every corner, and armed uniformed guards to patrol streets. Residents grumbled at first about the ballooning fees, but soon they embraced the narrative of an impenetrable fortress-like community. It took only one fanatic officer to push that system to its horrifying extreme. Now, the board was fracturing from within, the cracks in a once solid structure. Alan Connolly, the board president, found himself besieged by outraged phone calls from other residents. He was known for his ironclad convictions, particularly about safety. After all, a violent mugging in his youth had left him with a scar on his jawline and a permanent mistrust of strangers. He believed wholeheartedly in the necessity of firm boundaries. But after Jeanette's death, his phone rang off the hook with furious neighbors demanding accountability. "What if it had been my mother? Why did you hire that lunatic? I thought paramedics had universal clearance. Did you even consider that?" Panicked, Alan tried to reassure them. "We are investigating. We suspended him. We want justice too." His rhetoric sounded hollow, even to his own ears. The harsh truth was that no reassurance could bring back a lost life, or quiet the legal storm heading their way. Meanwhile, Meredith Evans spent her days in and out of physical therapy sessions. The Taser had shredded her sense of professional security and left her with nerve pain that flared in her arm. The humiliation of being attacked in the line of duty still pulsed in her mind. She could see Brad's eyes wide with conviction, see the light reflecting off the taser's metal prongs. It haunted her in quiet moments. Her supervisor at the EMS station had placed her on light duty, but she insisted she was ready to return to the ambulance. "I need to get back out there," she told Kyle. "I need to prove I am still me." Kyle felt the weight of guilt. He had been stuck inside the ambulance during the confrontation, calling the watch commander for clearance, and by the time he ran back, it was too late. He wondered if they should have just forced their way in, if they should have hopped the curb or sprinted past the guard from the start. Together, they visited Gary Williams, paying their respects and offering any support they could. He welcomed them with trembling arms. His grief was raw, but it hardened into a steely resolve to see the board held accountable. The board has hidden behind guidelines, policies, and locked gates for too long, Gary said, eyes wet but fierce. Jeanette always said we paid them too much, gave them too much power. She was right. Meredith and Kyle listened as Gary recounted their 50-year marriage, the travels, the grandchildren, the dream of a quiet retirement. The paramedics could not help but feel that the blame for Jeanette's death extended far beyond one guard's misguided actions. It was a system designed to treat every outsider like a threat, a system that had somehow deprived a dying woman of emergency care. With the funeral behind him, Gary joined forces with an experienced attorney named Rebecca Stokes, a formidable litigator known for her empathy and tenacity. As the lawsuit advanced, tensions rose. With depositions scheduled and subpoenas handed out, homeowners whispered about their own potential liability. Some called board members, in a frenzy demanding to know how high the legal costs could climb. Others took the opportunity to voice frustrations about the oppressive policies they had once quietly tolerated. A single question lingered in the thick suburban air: had Orchard Pine Estates, once a place where neighbors cared for neighbors, become so fortified, so wary of strangers, that its rules were literally killing people? The question gnawed at the board members, but if they thought the worst had come and gone, they were mistaken. The lawsuit threatened not just their seats on the board, but their very futures. The unstoppable momentum of litigation was hurtling toward them, and the entire neighborhood braced for impact. Inside the clubhouse's conference room, the chatter died down as Rebecca Stokes strode in. She was a slender woman in her late 50s, with graying hair pulled into a sleek bun and eyes that flicked around the room like a hawk surveying prey. This was the opening round of depositions, a formal but tense environment. Board members sat grim-faced at a long rectangular table, a swirl of coffee cups and legal pads in front of them. A few attorneys hired by the Homeowners Association insurance company muttered suggestions on how best to respond. No one seemed at ease. The staccato tapping of Rebecca's heels announced her presence as she took her seat, adjusted a stack of documents, and glanced at the clock. She started the session with a calm but firm tone. "We are on the record. Now this is the deposition of Alan Connolly, representing the Orchard Pine Estates Board of Directors in a matter of Williams versus Orchard Pine Estates Homeowners Association." Her words might as well have been a starting pistol. Palpable tension rippled across the table. Alan cleared his throat. He was a tall, older man with neatly combed white hair, wearing a tailored suit that hinted at some measure of affluence. The scar on his jaw twitched when he was nervous. On the inside, his heart hammered. Like a frightened rabbit, he had dealt with fussy homeowners complaining about shrubbery heights, but never a high-stakes wrongful death suit that might decimate everything he and his fellow board members had worked for. "Rebecca," began Mr. Connolly, "can you please describe how security protocols were established in your community?" He launched into a careful explanation, recounting the petty crimes, the vandalism, and the burglary that spurred them to approve stricter measures. As he spoke, lawyers for the defense nodded sympathetically, but Rebecca's face remained neutral, awaiting her chance. "And at no point," she pressed, "did you consider that emergency services, fire trucks, ambulances, might need unimpeded access to respond to life-threatening calls?" Alan squirmed. "We had arrangements for an immediate call to the guardhouse, which was supposed to open the gates upon verification. We never intended to impede first responders." "Yet," Rebecca said, leaning forward. "You hired individuals like Brad Morton, who had the authority to detain or remove any person who did not follow the procedures you collectively established. Did you or did you not give the guardhouse instructions to question anyone who did not have a gate pass?" The question hung in the air, loaded. Allen glanced at his own attorney, who signaled him to answer carefully. "Yes," he admitted, "but we also told them to use their judgment and common sense." That was precisely what the plaintiff's lawyer needed. And in this case, Mr. Morton's judgment led him to taser a clearly uniformed paramedic. "Correct." Allen's mouth went dry. "That was not the protocol." "It happened regardless," Rebecca said, her voice cool. "Would you say that the atmosphere of heightened vigilance fostered by the board contributed to his actions?" The depositions continued for hours. Board members offered cautious answers, trying to shift blame to Brad or the security company. Yet no matter how they angled, they could not deny that the policies were their responsibility. The insurance attorneys flinched as each new detail emerged, sensing the magnitude of potential liability. Meanwhile, outside the clubhouse, the residents of Orchard Pine Estates carried on with their daily routines, watching from behind partially closed blinds as camera crews hovered. The sidewalks were dotted with rose bushes and American flags, but the usual neighborly smiles were replaced by wary nods. The community was no longer a fortress of serenity. It was ground zero for a lawsuit that had already reached local tabloids and threatened to go national. Across town, in a dimly lit living room, Meredith Evans sat on a worn couch reading an email from the district attorney's office. It confirmed that they were investigating potential criminal charges against Brad Morton. Meredith felt relief wash over her, but also guilt. She knew a paramedic never wanted to be the reason someone else got locked up, but Brad's actions had cost a life. The law demanded an answer. Her phone buzzed. Kyle, her partner, was calling. "We just got a request for your statement in the depositions next week," he said. "They want both of us to talk about what happened that day." Meredith glanced down at her bandaged arm, wincing. "I will tell them exactly how it went down. If that helps Gary get justice, so be it." Gary Williams, for his part, had managed to quell his raw grief long enough to tackle the logistics of a major lawsuit. He conferred daily with Rebecca, sharing every snippet of communication he had had with the board or the security office over the years. Memos about homeowners association fee hikes, letters regarding public safety concerns, emails about the new protocols. The memory of his wife's final words kept him focused. "My chest, it is so tight. Please, someone call help." Every piece of paper, every detail, was a puzzle piece he hoped would compel a jury to see things his way. And in the midst of these swirling depositions, interviews, and legal maneuverings, something happened that no one could have predicted. A group of fed-up homeowners within Orchard Pine started to rally behind Gary, demanding the immediate resignation of the entire board. They began a petition circulated through door-to-door visits and community social media. "Save our community." The headline read, "Return Orchard Pine to a place of trust and compassion." Allen heard about the petition from a fellow board member who had angrily thrust a flyer into his hand. "They are going to run us out if we do not fix this. What is our plan?" But Allen had no plan. The fortress he helped build had become a prison of liability, and all he could think was how one guard, one taser, and one lost minute had destroyed both a woman's life and the sense of security their fortress had promised. By the end of that deposition day, the board members looked drained, as though they had aged a decade in a matter of hours. Rebecca Stokes packed up her documents, a look of professional detachment on her face, but her eyes burned with fierce purpose. The first shots of the legal war had been fired, and the casualties were mounting. If Orchard Pine's leadership hoped to salvage any shred of reputation or avoid financial ruin, they would need a miracle. But in real life, miracles are often in short supply. As late autumn leaves swirled across the driveways of Orchard Pine Estates, the tension in the neighborhood escalated for the first time since the community's founding. Picket signs appeared on manicured lawns. Homeowners Association reforms now, paramedics not paperwork, justice for Jeanette. The signs were homemade with sharp black lettering on white poster. Bored residents who never would have questioned the board's authority a few weeks ago were suddenly energized, feeling an urgency to correct a grievous injustice. It was not just the older crowd either. Adult children who had moved back in with their aging parents argued passionately at community gatherings about removing the board. Elderly widows who had once prided themselves on civility felt their anger ignite at each new revelation from the lawsuit. Everyone seemed to have a story. Some frustration with the homeowners association's labyrinthine rules or the ever-escalating security presence. Late one Saturday afternoon, a large crowd gathered outside the gates. Neighbors, local activists, even a local news crew. Signs aloft, they chanted for the board to step down. It was a surreal sight in a place known for crochet blankets and quiet dinner parties. But the real tipping point came when rumors started swirling that the security company was unlicensed to use stun guns. That piece of gossip whipped up a frenzy. Was the board hiring underqualified guards and arming them with lethal tools? A flurry of calls to the county licensing office suggested that indeed no official permit had been filed for taser usage by the Homeowners Association security team. If confirmed, the board was staring down not just a civil suit for wrongful death, but potential regulatory penalties. Inside the grandiose clubhouse, panic set in. A frustrated and fearful group of board members confronted one another in the wood-paneled lounge, voices echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "We have to cut ties with the security company," one member insisted. "Are you out of your mind?" Another fired back. "That would be an admission of wrongdoing." Alan Connolly tried to maintain order, but the arguments grew heated, swirling around him like a hailstorm. He sank into a chair, feeling the weight of his presidency press on his shoulders. Each voice demanded a different solution, but none of them offered a clean exit from the looming legal disaster. In a last-ditch effort, Alan decided to speak directly with Gary Williams. Perhaps some kind of private settlement could be reached. An olive branch, money for the family, an apology that could end the lawsuit before it bankrupted them all. So swallowing his pride, he drove to Gary's modest house. The front lawn still had fall leaves that had been left unraked since Jeanette's passing. A black ribbon hung on the mailbox. Alan's heart thudded as he rang the bell. When Gary answered, his eyes darkened at the sight of Alan. "I was not expecting you," he said, voice taut. Alan cleared his throat. "May I come in?" Reluctantly, Gary allowed him inside, leading him into a living room cluttered with photo albums and half-empty boxes of tissues. A wedding photo of Gary and Jeanette in their 20s, all smiles, dominated the mantel. It looked like a happier era, a time when Orchard Pine Estates did not even exist yet. They sat opposite each other across a small coffee table. Alan began, "I am here because this lawsuit is turning into a tragedy for everyone." Gary's jaw twitched. "A tragedy? My wife is dead, Mr. Connolly, because your guard tossed a paramedic. Everything else pales in comparison." Alan nodded, feeling the sting of those words. "I know there is no bringing her back. I accept that. But I want to see if we can find a resolution that spares everyone more pain." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I am sure our attorneys can work out a settlement, compensation for what you have lost, an apology, some changes in policy, whatever you think might help." Silence. Gary stared at Alan, his eyes filled with the swirl of grief and fury. Finally, he spoke. "My wife was priceless. Do you think a check is going to fix this?" Alan stammered. "No, I just want to offer something. I know this lawsuit might drag on for years. The board is willing to meet you halfway." Gary shook his head. "If you truly want to help, disband this board of directors that values protocol more than human life. Fire that entire security outfit and start fresh with guidelines that protect residents without barricading emergency services." The words settled in the room like a final ultimatum. Alan's posture wilted. He knew the other board members would never agree to disbanding, let alone sweeping changes that might sink property values or lead to skyrocketing insurance premiums. That is not all within my power." Gary's lips pressed into a thin line. "Then there is Nothing more to say. I will see you in court that evening. After Alan recounted the conversation to the rest of the board, a tremor of fear rippled through them. They had hoped for a quiet settlement, monetary damages, and something to keep the fiasco from ballooning. But Gary Williams was determined to do more than just collect a check. He wanted to topple the entire system that had contributed to his wife's death. And that prospect was frightening to any board member who treasured the community's reputation or had personal investments in property or retirement plans. Meanwhile, Rebecca Stokes and Meredith Evans were methodically building their case. Meredith sat for hours with attorneys describing in minute detail how a paramedic responds to a heart attack call, how vital seconds can mean the difference between life and death, how she had identified herself, repeated she was with EMS, shown her uniform, and yet was treated like a criminal invader. The attorneys asked about her training, her credentials, all the steps she followed. Meredith's statement would be devastating evidence if the case went before a jury. Coupled with the public outcry, it would be an uphill battle for the board and the security firm, as lawsuits so often do this one became a catalyst for introspection among the residents of Orchard Pine. Conversations in driveways turned into heated debates about freedom versus security, compassion versus caution. Had they created an environment so consumed by the fear of strangers that they forgot their duty to each other? It was a question that lingered as the nights grew colder and the community braced for the legal trial looming on the horizon. They all sensed that the verdict would not just shape the Williams family's future, it would redefine Orchard Pine Estates for generations to come. The courtroom was hushed except for the nervous tapping of fingers against tabletops. On one side sat Gary Williams and his attorney Rebecca Stokes, along with Meredith Evans in her official paramedic's uniform. On the other side, the Orchard Pine Estates Homeowners Association board members were lined up clad in somber suits, flanked by their own legal team. A handful of residents had made the trek downtown to witness the final chapter of this harrowing saga, though many more watched it unfold on live news coverage. The trial had progressed at a steady pace. Witness after witness took the stand. Kyle testified about the frantic call, the blocked access, and how he found Meredith writhing on the ground from the taser shock. The jury leaned in, their expressions shifting from curiosity to horror as he recounted the wasted seconds that could have saved Jeanette Williams' life. Medical experts weighed in, explaining that with immediate care, Jeanette's odds of survival would have been significantly higher. They said it in calm, clinical tones, but the message landed like a hammer blow. Then came Brad Morton's turn. The guard appeared disheveled, his normally crisp uniform replaced by a rented suit. He spoke timidly at first, explaining how he had been trained to question every visitor and ensure they had clearance under cross-examination. His defensiveness flared. "I did what I was hired to do." The board was all about security, no exceptions. The tension in the room was palpable as he tried to shift blame onto the Homeowners Association's strict policies. But in the next breath, he insisted, "I did not mean to kill anyone. I was just following orders." It culminated in a showdown between attorneys, each framing the board's responsibility in different lights. The Homeowners Association defense insisted that Brad had acted outside of the policies. They never authorized the use of force against clearly identified emergency personnel. But Rebecca hammered on the environment that the board had created. "This was not a rogue officer," she declared. "This was an inevitable outcome of your militarized fortress mentality." Over the final days of the trial, the arguments grew sharper. Alan Connolly returned to the stand. This time, his voice shaky with frustration, he insisted they had never intended to block ents, but the prosecuting attorney held up a large diagram of the community's layered security protocols, highlighting each step a visitor was forced to undergo. "When is enough enough?" she asked the jury. "When do the rules become so rigid that they cost a life?" The jury's deliberation was tense and lengthy, a full day, and then another partial day. Outside the courthouse, protesters held signs, their breath misting in the chilly autumn air. Finally, on a Tuesday afternoon, the clerk announced that the jury had reached a verdict. The crowd filed back in, heartbeats thrumming with anticipation. In a clear voice, the foreperson said, "We, the jury, find in favor of the plaintiff, Gary Williams, and ruled that the Orchard Pine Estates Homeowners Association is liable for wrongful death through negligence and obstructive security policies." The hush that followed was momentary, then a flurry of gasps and murmurs. The clerk continued, announcing significant monetary damages that the Homeowners Association and its security contractor would be obligated to pay enough to send the board into a financial tailspin. Gary Williams closed his eyes, letting a wave of emotion roll over him. He clutched a small photo of Jeanette. Justice felt bittersweet, but he hoped this verdict would save someone else's spouse in the future. Rebecca. Stokes placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder, the glimmer of triumph in her eyes. The board members stood there like statues, as though the breath had been knocked out of them. This was not the minor settlement they had once hoped for. This was a decisive statement that their fortress-like approach to security was part of the lethal chain of events. Within days, the aftermath rippled across Orchard Pine Estates like a shockwave. Faced with massive financial obligations, the Homeowners Association had no choice but to consider dissolution or a fundamental restructuring. The fortress approach was abandoned. The entire security force was let go, replaced by a streamlined system that ensured paramedics and firefighters would never again be delayed. The fancy scanners and guardhouses were dismantled, or at least downgraded. Residents began advocating for more human connection, more trust in their neighbors. Ellen Connolly resigned under pressure. Some board members fled the community altogether, selling their homes at reduced prices to escape the stigma. Others stayed, offering apologies to neighbors trying in their own ways to atone. One resident, an older woman named Clara, organized a neighborhood watch that worked directly with local law enforcement, ensuring that real criminals, rather than imaginary threats, were identified. And if an ambulance ever pulled up again, no gate, no guard would stand in its way. Meanwhile, Meredith Evans slowly returned to a life of normalcy, though the memory of the taser's current still haunted her. The local EMS department recognized her courage with an award acknowledging the injustice she had faced. She accepted it on behalf of all first responders who risked their lives to save strangers. Every day, often in the face of bureaucratic roadblocks, Gary Williams found himself inundated with media requests from talk shows to podcasts. He was not looking for fame. His only message was simple: do not let rules get in the way of common sense and compassion. He donated a significant portion of the settlement to a scholarship fund for aspiring paramedics, naming it after Jeanette. She was a nurturer, he often said. This is what she would have wanted. And so, the once idyllic Orchard Pine Estates was forced to rebuild not just its infrastructure, but its sense of community. Neighbors, who had once been content to let board members handle everything, now chose to be more involved, more mindful of how easily fear can turn neighbor against neighbor. The gates remained, but symbolic cracks were visible where rigid policies had once stood. Residents, especially those in their later years, found a renewed purpose in making sure the tragedies of the past would not be repeated. In the end, Jeanette Williams' death served as a heartbreaking reminder that safety measures without humanity can become dangerous. The slow collapse of the Homeowners Association board and its policies stood as a cautionary tale, a warning about what happens when fear overshadows empathy. Lives can be lost in that darkness. But from the ashes of orchard blossoms, from the heartbreak of a stunned paramedic, came the seeds of a new beginning. One where paramedics were not trespassers and caring for a neighbor took precedence over scanning a code. It was a lesson learned painfully, but one that might ensure no one else in Orchard Pine Estates or beyond would ever have to watch a loved one die on the other side of a locked gate. And for Gary, that knowledge, bittersweet as it was, offered the only solace he could take in a world suddenly devoid of his beloved Jeanette's laughter. The end.